Thank you so much for allowing me to be here all the way from Houston, Texas. I am from Houston, but I went to Mississippi State University and had season tickets while the one and only Dak Prescott. So, I will say, go Cowboys. Go Cowboys. There it is, yeah. But here's what's great. Here I am in Pennsylvania, and there's I think 15, 20 Cowboys fans. You know how many Eagles fans I have in my church? None, because why? Even if you don't live here. Hey, just no. I am, but I'm honored to be here. As I said, as Pastor Alex said, I work for Destiny Ministries, also a pastor church in the Houston area, and I'm married. I have 2 kids. They're gonna put the picture on the screen, and my wife and my 2 daughters, Vanna and Zara. So, Vanna, the oldest one, is just like me, funny, charming, good-looking. And Zara, the youngest one, is just like her mother, beautiful but a diva, right? So the other day, Zara came home from school, and she said, "Dad, I have a question for you." And I said, What, baby? And she said, "Would you rather be pretty and broke or ugly and rich?" So, Zara, I'm not sure, but it seems like you've given this some thought. So what do you think? And she said, "I would rather be pretty and broke." Because if you're pretty, you can marry someone rich. And if you don't like them, you just break up with them and take their money. And now you're pretty and rich. So you hear some parents who pray for their kids' spouses, because you want to make sure you have the right person to come into your kid's life. I pray for my kids' spouses because they just need it. I already know. But what she was tapping into is that sometimes the world gives us an either-or choice when the answer is actually both and. And I'm happy to be in a both-and house this morning. Both the Word of God and the presence of God. But both truth and grace. Both spiritual power and spiritual health. Both good services, things done with excellence, and flowing with the Holy Spirit. That's not easy to do. And so I want to give honor to your pastors, Pastors Alex and Tammy, because they are incredible. And I'm just saying this, Journey Church, that sometimes whenever we attend a church for a while, we lose sight of the gift that we've been given. But in Ephesians, we said that the fivefold ministry, they are gifts to the church. And you have an uncommon gift with your pastors here, known all over the U.S. as people of integrity, of power. They're loved and respected all over. And here you just have to know good pastors, and they are gifts. Thank you so much for allowing me to do this. Hey, I want to take us to the book of Judges. I got a word. I do believe that what Pastor Alex was feeling is going to happen. I believe some folks are going to get free today. I believe that this is going to be Freedom Sunday. In the book of Judges, the same pattern happens over and over again. The people of God would rebel against God. He would send punishment to bring them back. They would be judged. All of a sudden their tune would change. They would cry out and pray to God. God would send a rescuer or a judge to deliver them. They would get comfortable and then repeat the cycle over and over and over again. And as we get to Judges chapter 6, we'll see this time the enemy is the Midianites. And the Midianites were hanging around the children of Israel, and every time it was time to reap the wheat harvest, the Midianites would come in and steal it. They weren't there for harvest, for sowing time, but they were there for harvest time. Come on, you got some folks in your life like that. They're not there whenever you're putting the work in, but when the paycheck comes, they show up. Come on, I know you got teenagers. On payday, they come out with their hand out. They didn't do any of the work, but yet they want the harvest. You've got people in your life that whenever you're going to counseling and doing the deep work and trying to make yourself better, they're nowhere to be seen. And then whenever they see you on the other side, healed and healthy and whole, they start showing back up again. And no, if you weren't there for my sowing days, you can't be there for my reaping days. You can't just show up in my good times if you weren't there in my bad times. You don't get to come in and out of my life based on your convenience. I need some people in my life who are with me in the good and the bad when I don't have anything and when I need people in my life like that. But the Midianites just kept coming in and taking the Israelites' lunch money over and over again. And I guess there are several ways of looking at this. The one thing you could say is this is a political problem. You have two nation states that just can't get along, and the Midianites and the Israelites. So what we really need is to elect the right person and solve this. No. You could also say this is an economic problem. They're taking our supply away. This is how we feed our families. And it's it's not an economic problem. It was a spiritual problem. And so the people cried out to God. They didn't look for political solutions. They didn't look for economic solutions. They cried out to God. Let me let you know something. Every attack on your life is not an attack of the enemy. Sometimes your car runs out of gas because you didn't put enough in it. And it's not the devil. Sometimes your relationship problems are because you're a jerk and people don't like you. And instead you're blaming God. Is that he's just coming against my relationships? No, it's not. It's you. Don't put that off on the devil. You're doing a good job running it all by yourself. But there are seasons of life where you look around and go, this is a spiritual problem. That the attack on my family is not a common attack. This is an uncommon attack of the enemy. That the attack on my finances, this is the enemy working in my life, and I'm going to stand up and cry out to God and ask Him to rescue me because I need a spiritual solution to a spiritual problem. Come on, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against strongholds and principalities and high places. And I've got to say, I'm tired of the attack of the enemy on my life and on my family, and there's got to be a solution that is spiritual. That's why when we preach to you, we'll give you some practical tools to help you, but we will never undermine or belittle what God can do in a moment. It's why we do the prayer time moment, because we realize there are problems in your life that just need to be taken before God, and you are one prayer away, one moment in the presence of God away, just one from everything changing. And what you've been trying to do in a lifetime, God can do in a moment, in one moment in His presence when we cry out to God. And today there will be some freedom that you achieve because you cry out to God. And in the time of the judges, they cried out to God, and it says the angel of the Lord came. That whenever Israel was being tortured by the Midianites, an angel showed up. And he sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. In those days, you didn't thresh wheat in a winepress. You threshed wheat in an open field because you needed the wind to help the process. You know, Jesus talks about separating the wheat from the chaff. So what happened is you would harvest the wheat and you would thresh it, and then you would take it and you would throw it up, and the chaff would get blown away, and the wheat, being heavier, would fall down. So you needed to be in an open field. Whereas a wine press is enclosed on all sides. And you put the grapes there, and then you smash it up with your feet, and that's how you made wine. How many are glad you don't have to drink foot wine? We don't do foot wine for a communion, but that's how they made wine in the biblical days. It's just like, yeah, how's that? Yeah. Come on, wine and cheese? No, okay, I'll stop. It's so gross. It's so gross. But this was not an ideal place to thresh wheat. This wasn't a place to get the best product. But Gideon said, I would rather have less than the best rather than do it out in the open field where the Midianites are going to come and take it again. So this is a fearful move. It's someone who's living way beneath the best that God has for him. Someone who is just tired of getting ransacked by the enemy. Someone who just cannot take another day and another attack. Someone who says, if the phone rings one more time with one more piece of bad news, I don't think I can take it. And so he's hiding out, living a life under what God intends because he's tired of the attack on the enemy. And an angel shows up. And when the angel shows up, he says, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. So here's the problem. I don't see a mighty warrior. I see a scared farmer. I don't see someone living his best. I see someone who is sick and tired of the attack of the enemy and hiding out. All I see is a scared farmer, but God sees a mighty warrior. And I'll let you know this morning that whenever you see yourself, you're not seeing yourself the way that God sees you. You see the problems with addiction. You see the problems in your relationships. You see the problems with your weaknesses. You see your insufficiencies. You see your relationship struggles. And when God sees you, he sees someone who is more than a conqueror. He sees someone who has been blessed by God and purposed by God to do something mighty and great. And when people see you, they may not see what God sees, but all that matters is how God sees you, not how you see you. We live in a culture that tells you that your self-esteem is the utmost value. Your self-esteem is not what's most important. How you view yourself is important, but it's not the most important thing. What's most important isn't self-esteem, but it's God-esteem. It's how does God see you? Whenever he created you and formed you in your mother's womb, how did he wire you? And yes, you're a scared farmer, but God sees a mighty warrior. And then Gideon responds, well, pardon me, my Lord. Gideon, you know how many times I prayed for just like God to give me like a little bit of an impression that he would speak to me? And now Gideon here, he's got an angel of God right before him. Well, pardon me, my Lord. Gideon replied, but if the Lord is with us, oh, you've prayed this. If the Lord is with us, you said this week at some point, then why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? Where is the God that my grandmama told me about? Where is the way maker who made a way for other people? Where is he in this situation? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian. I would say that Gideon is not just in the wine press literally, he's in the wine press figuratively. W-H-I-N-E. And he's whining about his life and his circumstances. And God comes to him and says, you are a mighty warrior. And Gideon starts to talk God out of blessing him. And Gideon starts to say, well, God, how can I trust you? Because why is all this happening to us? That Gideon interpreted what he believed to be true about God through the lens of his circumstances. He said, I don't think you can really do anything, God, because if you're really with me, if you're really with our people, then why has all this happened? If you're really with me, then why are my kids struggling? If you're really with me, then why is my relationship not what you want? If you're really with me, then why am I sick? If you're really with me.
Come on. That's good.
And what I've learned is that I cannot interpret what I believe about God through the lens of my circumstances. I've got to interpret my circumstances through what I believe to be true about God. That I have to look at my circumstances and say, yeah, that's a problem, but here's what I know to be true. Greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. Yes, I can't tell God how big my storm is. I have to tell my storm how big my God is, because it's just looking at it from another perspective. And Gideon begins to tell God, you say you're with us, but then why is all this happening? And then he moves on, and the Lord says, go in the strength that you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? Look at your neighbor and say, go in the strength that you have. Go with the gifts that you have. I know you don't feel qualified, but here's what God's doing in your life. That you go with whatever you have and it'll be enough. You're not as educated as they are. Well, God didn't ask you to go with their education. He told you to go with your education. You're not as gifted as they are, but God didn't ask you to go with their gift. He told you to go with your gift. You don't have as much money as they do, but God didn't tell you to go with their money. He said to go with the money that you have, and it'll be enough, because whatever you have, once you put it in God's hands, it's more than enough. See, in my hands, it's just 5 loaves and 2 fish, but in God's hands, it'll feed a multitude. That in my hands, it's a staff, but in God's hands, it's a serpent that will shake the nations and set Israel free if I put the little bit that I have. Man, and I've spent a ministry career in a lifetime trying to get more strength and more gifts. And God's saying, man, don't stop that, because it's not about getting more. It's about letting God use what you have. You already have everything you need to live a life of godliness and victory. You have everything you need to live a life of breakthrough and power. It's not about getting more. It's about giving God what you've already have. You've heard enough word that if you would just act on the word you have instead of getting more word, how many podcasts can you listen to? Just got to go with what you have. We don't have a content problem. We have an action problem. You have enough. Go in the strength that you have. And then Gideon, my Lord, Gideon. Pardon me, my Lord. Gideon, an angel of the Lord is showing up to your threshing floor, to your wine press. He has told you he's going to use you to deliver his people. And this is the second time you've said, pardon me. Let me let you know something. If I was God, there would be a lot more death by lightning bolt. Just telling you. There would just be an unexplainable rise in lightning bolt deaths, because I can't deal with people like this. I mean, I have to pray things like, Lord, if it's really your will you just make the first car I see be a blue car? And then he just gets an angel of the Lord, and he keeps going, well, pardon me, or can you clarify? But how could I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. Gideon's first concern was about the faithfulness of God. And once he worked through that, his second concern is about the qualification of himself. See, my faith problem is usually not in God. I believe God can do anything. I believe that he can heal the sick and raise the dead, restore the broken. I believe that he can do exceedingly abundantly above anything that I can ask or think according to his glory. I believe in God. It's just believing in myself sometimes that's hard. And so Gideon started with a theological problem, but then he moved to an anthropological problem. It's a human problem of how does this apply to me? How can you use me? God, even if you were good enough to intervene in my situation, God, even if you were good enough to send a revival to Pennsylvania, God, even if you were good enough, how could you use someone like me? And the Lord answered, I will be with you. Did you notice that God does not directly respond to Gideon's question? That God does not have to explain himself to you? That God does not have to condescend to a level where he answers all of your questions? He says, Gideon, I'm not talking about you and how strong you are. I'm not talking about your family history, your family trauma, your generational curses. I'm not talking about any of that kind of stuff. I'm just telling you that I will be with you. And if I am with you, then that's going to be more than enough. It's never been about what you have to offer. It's never been about your strengths. It's always about God who is working through you. You plus God equals a majority. Because it's not about what you have to offer, Gideon. So he asked for, and I don't have time to go into all of it, but he asked for and receives another sign. And then the word of the Lord comes and tells him to build an altar. I got to move past this quickly, but we can't miss it. It says, Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it, "The Lord is Peace." God came to Gideon and said, I'm going to use you to slaughter the Midianites and there will be a bloody battle. And Gideon builds an altar saying, "The Lord is peace." Gideon, I'm calling you to fight the fight of your life. And Gideon built an altar saying, "The Lord is peace." Gideon, I'm calling you to a battle, but Gideon says, "The Lord is peace." Maybe peace isn't what we think it means. Maybe peace isn't the absence of conflict. Maybe peace is the presence of God in conflict. Maybe whenever God comes to you and offers you his peace, he's not saying he's going to remove you from every obstacle and every storm and every tribulation. He said, I will be with you in the middle of the storm, that there will be peace in the midst of it, that I'm not removing you from the battle, but I'm going to give you peace in the battle. Man, I've came to church before and I prayed to God to take away all my problems, and I leave discouraged because I leave with the same things that I walk in with, and that sometimes I've realized that God does not remove me from my circumstances. He empowers me in my circumstances, that his strength is made perfect in those weak spaces and weak moments, and he is with me. And that's why Gideon can say, yes, you're calling me to a bloody battle, but I'm going to worship you as the God of peace. And then, that same night, the Lord shows back up. See, that's why I don't like Gideon. God just tells them everything. I pray all the time. I've even fasted before. Read my Bible, go to church. I've never had an angel visit me. Second time, in the same day, the Lord shows up and says, take the second bull from your father's herd, the one that's 7 years old. Tear down your father's altar to Baal. Cut down the Asherah pole beside it. Then build a proper kind of altar to the Lord your God on top of the height. Using the wood of the Asherah pole that you cut down, offer the second bull as a burnt offering. And I'm assuming Gideon would say, God, when are we going to go defeat the Midianites? Remember earlier, you told me you were going to use me to deliver Israel, and I was going to save the nation, and I was going to do this mighty work. Now you're telling me to go to my backyard and take down the false gods and build the right kind of altar. That maybe sometimes God wants us to take care of our own house before we can save a nation. that maybe sometimes God says, I want to use you to do something great, but there's an idol in your own backyard. And until you tear down the idol in your own backyard, I can't use you to do something great. I know you want to save the nation, but how's your house? I know some folks who are so worried about prayer not being in schools, when I know for a fact there's no prayer in their homes either. and you're wanting to vote people in and out, like, who's going to put prayer back in school? Well, you can't control prayer in school, but you can control, as for me and my house, this is what we do here. The sanctity of marriage I'm most concerned about is my own. And I'm trying to save the nation's problems whenever there are things going on in my house. And God can't use me to save a nation when I've got an idol in my own backyard. And so often, we think God is always calling us to do the big thing. And God says, no, start at home. There's some idols in your own house. There's some things that have been exalted against me in your own backyard. That there's not proper worship happening there. And if you aren't willing to do the private things, you'll never be used publicly. Jesus said this. Jesus says that you will be challenged privately before you'll be used publicly. He says the things that you do in secret will lead to a reward in public. And I know a lot of people who want public success but won't do the work privately. I know a lot of people who want to be seen as success, but success starts at home. Success starts in your backyard. that I don't want to gain the whole world and lose my own soul or my family's souls. That I don't want to save the nation while ignoring an idol in my own backyard. So finally, after Gideon has passed the private devotion test, that after he has passed the test, God uses him publicly, and he rallies the warriors of Israel, and 32,000 people show up. All right, that's pretty good, until you realize that Midian has 135,000. And they're ready to fight. But then Gideon, he asks for another sign. You're right. The angelic visitations, the Lord himself showing up in your house. You're right. It's not enough, Gideon. Maybe one more. And so he tells the Lord, I'm going to put this fleece out. And if in the morning the dew has settled around the fleece, but the fleece itself is dry, then I will know. Then I will know for a fact that you want me to do what you've already told me explicitly 17 times to do. And lo and behold, he wakes up and there it is. It happens. And then he's like, okay, God, well, that could have been coincidence. So let's do it one more time. But this time, I want the fleece wet and the ground around it dry. And God does it. No lightning bolts. But after all the visitations and after all the signs, at some point, you just have to make a decision. I'm going to do the thing that God's called me to do. That at some point, you've just got to make a decision. That as for me and my house, we're going to serve God, and we're going to just do what God's called us to do. A few weeks ago, I went skydiving for the first time. Yeah. And so I went with a couple guys from church. There were 4 of us in total, and 2 guys went before me. They jumped out. They survived. They made it, and then it was my turn. So I get in the plane. It's a little tiny plane. And I'm strapped in. I'm having to kiss my knees because I'm just cramped up like this. I'm jumping tandem, so the guy that's, he's like, I'm wearing him like a backpack. He's like, I got this guy in my backpack, and very uncomfortable, very awkward. But never been that close to anybody in my life. And the plane begins to take off on the runway, and I'm going to jump out of an airplane, and my adrenaline is through the roof. And then the plane sputters. Never makes it off the runway. And then they said, hey, we're going to fix the plane. You go back into the airport. We've got some free cookies for you. And look, I don't care how old you are, a free cookie makes everything better. And it was an oatmeal raisin cookie, which are the best kind of cookies. And for all the chocolate chip people, I just have to say, that don't blame us because your palate is not sophisticated enough. Look, if you like the same cookie that you did when you were 3 years old, it means that you've just never matured. We're told in the Bible that we are to grow up beyond childish things. And so if you're still eating chocolate chip cookies, you're just in rebellion, and we'll have a moment here. So I'm eating my cookie, and they're like, hey, we think we have it fixed. And you always love that we think we have it fixed. So get back in the airplane, I kiss my knees again, put the guy back on my backpack, and sputter, just can't take off. So you can't go today. So we go back to the skydiving center. We're trying to figure out if we're going to refund, reschedule, whatever. And then as I'm in line at the skydiving center, I see the little plane, and it's flying. Like, oh, they got it fixed. Then they call and say, hey, we got the plane fixed. You still want to go? But here's the problem. The 2 guys from my church have already done it. And I cannot live in a world where they did something that I was too scared to do. And so I get back in the airplane, kiss my knees, put the guy in my backpack, and the plane takes off this time. So if someone ever asked me, why did you jump out of a perfectly good plane? I didn't. My plane was broken. It wasn't a perfectly good plane. I was safer once I jumped out, I think. But here's the thing. I had gotten so used to almost going and not going that I wasn't really prepared when it was time to go. Because I had been sputter, sputter, stop, adrenaline raised but not going. And then I'm in the air and the door opens and I go, I'm about to fall out of this plane. And how often the stop and goes. I think I'm going to do it. God, here I am, send me. And you do that in the altar. Then the next Sunday, you're like, yeah, here I am, send me. And then one more time, God. And at some point, you've got to stop asking for signs and getting confirmation and just say, God, this is the thing you've called me to do, and I'm going to do it. Like I can't ask for another sign. I've got to just act on what I've already been told, act on the revelation I've already been given, act on what I already know. And at some point, you've got to decide, either you jump out of the plane, you stay on the plane, but you have to make a decision. And so now he knows. After all the fleece, he's ready to go. And God comes to him and says, hey, we have a numbers problem. Gideon says, yes, I know we have a numbers problem. I have 32,000 and they have 135,000. There's a problem. And God's like, you've got too many men. Oh, okay, Gideon. God, I know you created math, but that math ain't mathing. Like, how do I have, I'm 100,000 down. How do I have too many men? And God says, I know you. I know that if there's any way for you to take credit for this, you will. And I know that if you take your 32,000 and beat their 135,000, you're going to start boasting about how good your military expertise is and how strong you are. Do you think that sometimes God puts us in impossible situations because whenever we get out of it, we can only say, not by strength and not by power and not by might, but only by the hand of God was I rescued? Come on, there are some of you that are in marriages right now that are so impossible. And whenever God saves you and heals your marriage, you're going to say, this was not because we read the 7 love languages. It's because the hand of God touched us and did what only God can do. It's why we see miraculous healings in third world countries that we don't see here, because there are people that say only God can say it. There is no doctor, there is no medical expert, there is no medicine, there is no pharmacy around, and if God doesn't do it, it doesn't get done. And I think we rely so much on our own strength that we miss out on miracles, because there are some things in your life that you cannot fix and you cannot do, but there is one if you'll just say, God, I want you to do it. I mean, I want to have the kind of ministry where people look at it and go, Landon had some gifts, but what God did through him is so much bigger than what he could have done. Can I just speak a word over Journey Church? What God is doing here, you're going to look back and go, how did God do that? It was just God. It wasn't the systems, though the systems are good. It wasn't the preaching, though the preaching is the best you're going to hear. It's not the worship, although the talent on the stage is unmatchable. Some things happen only by the hand and the power of God. And I want to proclaim a revival here at Journey Church, that when people see it, they go, God did that. That they got some talent, but they don't have that kind of talent. They got some gifts, they don't have that kind of gifts. They've got some buildings, but they don't have that kind of building. They've got some resources, but they don't have that kind of resource. That only God. I want to live my life in an only God kind of way. I want to lead my family in an only God kind of way. I don't want to have kids that grow up and live the American dream. I want to have kids that grow up and live God's dream for them. I know I can raise my kids and send them to school, but I want God to do something so supernatural through their lives. That's not because I'm a good parent. That's because the grace of God showed up. Whenever I preach, I'm asking God every single time before I take the stage, God, I want you to do what only you can do. I'm going to give you the gifts I have. I'm going to give you the strength that I have. I'm going to give it all that I have. But there is some breakthrough that needs to happen in this house this morning that I cannot do. And only you can do it, God. And never let me take credit for what you're doing. There's too many men, Gideon, because I know you. I know human nature. I know that whenever your life is going good, you take credit. And when it's going bad, you blame me. You realize we always ask God why bad things happen to us. We never have asked him why good things happen to us. For the good stuff. And so Gideon says, okay, too many men. All right. And he gathers everyone together and says, if you're scared, say you can leave if you want. Gideon thought, 8 or 10 people would scamper out the back. 22,000 hit the road. Man, now we have 10,000 left. All right, God, we've seen the fleece. We've seen Fleece Navidad already, and now it's just, let's do it, let's go. And God says, no, there's still too many. Man, you've been here before where the odds are stacked against you. And it feels like instead of getting more resources, you get less resources to deal with the problem. And instead of things getting better, they just keep getting worse. And so now at this point, I think God is just messing with Gideon. Because he says, now take your remaining 10,000 and tell them to get a drink of water. And if they lap it up like a dog, they're out. But if they cup it in their hands and they drink, then they're your people. And that's not as random as it sounds. It's because God is looking for people who keep their eyes up all the time. That if you're down on all fours drinking like that, then you can't see the enemy coming. That's what the Bible tells us, to be sober and to be vigilant. Because we have an enemy who is roaring about, seeking whom he may devour. And God's looking for people who can be nourished but still keep their eyes open. And that's the kind of people that God's looking for. I'm getting refreshed, but I'm aware that at any time the enemy can come. I put guardrails in my marriage because I'm just aware that even though we're in a good season right now, that any time the enemy can come. That I build boundaries around how my kids use social media because things are good right now, but I've got to stay alert and vigilant because I have a real enemy seeking about whom he may devour. And I can't afford to take my eyes off of my surroundings because as soon as I get comfortable with my morality, as soon as I get a little too comfortable with how strong I think that I am, I can fall and I can be weak. So I've just got to be alert and vigilant all the time. So after all this, there's only 300 left. What do we do now? And Gideon is terrified. He can't sleep at night. You know what that's like when there's a storm that takes your sleep away, where you toss and turn, anxious, overwhelmed. And so he can't sleep. He's afraid. I've got to somehow take my 300 and beat their 135,000. How am I going to do this? And the first thing you have to realize, Gideon, is that it's not about how many you have. It's about who you have. It's not about how many friends you have. It's do you have the right friends? That I would rather have 300 of the right folks than 32,000 of the wrong folks. But I would rather have 5 real life friends than 5,000 Facebook friends. The reason why revival is coming to Journey Church is not just because of the amount of people, it's because the right people. That God has put the right people for the right time in this place. It's not about how many, it's if are the right ones here. You got to realize you have enough people, Gideon. But that's still not enough. He can't sleep. And so finally God tells him to sneak into the Midianite camp. And so he sneaks into the Midianite camp. I don't have time to read it. But he hears one soldier say to another soldier, I saw a ball of barley roll through our camp, and it destroyed everyone. I think that's God saying that he's going to use that wheat farmer. Remember old boy who used to steal his lunch money? Remember the one that was so scared that he was hiding in a wine press? I think God's going to use him to defeat us. And then it hit me. While Gideon was tossing and turning, the enemy was also tossing and turning. How often have I lost sleep at night over things that the enemy should be scared about, not that I should be scared about? How often have I went to bed with tear-stained pillows, not knowing that God had already worked out the victory on the other side? And that it was already in motion, that the plan was already in place. And I got to realize sometimes that whenever I am scared and when I'm fearful, that I'm not the one who should be scared or fearful. That God has not given me a spirit of fear, but a power and love and a sound mind. But the enemy should be scared. The enemy should be wishing that they would have stolen anybody else's wheat. That the enemy wishes they should have picked on someone else because God knows something about me that they don't know. And if they knew what God knew, they'd have left my wheat alone. If they knew what God knew, they would have messed with someone else's family. If they knew what God knew, they would have messed with someone else's finances, because I'm not a scared farmer. I'm a mighty warrior, and you just haven't seen it yet. If you would have known, if you would have seen this coming, you would have stole someone else's wheat. You would have invaded someone else's field. But devil, since you showed up and brought the fight I didn't ask for this battle. I didn't ask for this fight. I didn't tell you to attack my kids. I didn't tell you to attack my finances. But since you're here, let's go. Let's do it. You should have messed with someone else. I'm looking around the room and I'm seeing some mighty warriors, some men and some women of God, and you've been hiding in a wine press, backed away from the fight, but he should have took someone else's lunch money, because everything that the enemy meant for evil, God is going to turn it around for good. And he's put a gift inside of you, a fight inside of you, a warrior inside of you that the enemy says, I should have never messed with the people of Journey Church. That before Journey Church showed up, this is just another county in Pennsylvania, but I'm going to do something through this place and the people that are here that have fought the very gates of hell to be here. I'm talking to the people that have been fighting for your family. The reason why is because you're a mighty warrior, and the enemy is going to regret the day he messed with you. Because other people might back away. And other people might run away, but you're going to begin to cry out to God. He's going to empower you with a power from on high. And through the gift of the Holy Spirit raised up inside of you, you're going to do things beyond your capabilities. Man, you should have messed with someone else. You saw me in the wine press scared, and you thought that's who I was. That's not who I am. You saw someone running from a fight, and that's not who I am. I'm a child of God, made in the image of God. I am gifted and called to do everything that God has called me to do. That I operate with the power of the Holy Spirit living on the inside of me. That whenever I speak, my words have authority to change situations. That in my hands are gifts of healing. And you just should have messed with someone else, devil. Stay standing with me. I don't have time to read this all, but essentially what happens in Judges chapter 7 is Gideon gets a strategy. And the strategy is this, that he's going to make as much noise as possible. And when the enemy hears the noise, they're not going to know there's only 300. They're going to think there's thousands because of the noise they're making. God gave you that big mouth for a reason. God called us to rowdy worship for a reason. Because whenever we praise, we don't just join those around us. We join with the saints and the angels in heaven. And we join with the multitudes. And when the enemy hears our praise, he doesn't hear the 400 or 500 in this building. He hears the angels and the saints that are around the throne going, holy, holy, holy. And he starts to think, oh my, there's not just 400 or 500 here. There's a multitude. There's a heavenly host. We got to do something. And when they heard the noise, they ran away. And they begin to turn on each other and attack and fight one another. And the chaos and the confusion led to their defeat. All because some people got rowdy. All because they started to make some noise. And here's what blows my mind. Is that strategy of Gideon? A scared farmer doesn't think of that. But a mighty warrior does. That God knew something about Gideon that Gideon did not know about himself. That God knew that Gideon had that strategic mind that Gideon didn't know about himself. What does God know about you that you don't know about yourself? What does the enemy not know about you that God does? Because I'm telling you, if the enemy knew, he'd have messed with someone else.